Good afternoon. Today I'm talking to Nigel Williams. Good afternoon, Nigel. Would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your books.
Yeah, okay. Lovely to meet you, Donna. Nice to have a chat with you at last.
You too.
As you said, my name is Nigel Williams. I live in the Swansea Valley, and I've pretty much lived here all my life, bar for a period of 3 years where I moved away and lived in London, but I'll get onto that a little bit later on. But I'm currently a lecturer in fine art in a college of further education, or as my daughter likes to say, I teach colouring in. I've done this for about 20 years now, so I'm just about getting okay at it. I wouldn't say I'm excellent at it, but I'm okay at it. But I've always had an interest in art. So when I finished with the police, and I'll get into that later on as well, it seemed to be a natural direction for me to go. So I went back to university and ended up teaching in college of further education. But I'm married. I live with my wife of 33 years. I've got 3 grown-up children. I've got 1 granddaughter, who's with us today, actually. And I've got a grandson who is due to join us on the 28th of July. So my eldest daughter is pregnant with a little boy, so that'll be something to look forward to. Yeah, as I said, I've spent most of my time in the Swansea Valley, really. I didn't do particularly well at school. So when I left school, I decided to join the police. South Wales Police at that time were basically only employing someone who was extremely good at playing rugby. Whilst I wasn't particularly bad, I wasn't in that sort of league to be snapped up by South Wales Police, because I think they were probably the first professional rugby team in the UK. So I decided to join the Mets instead. I joined the Metropolitan Police in 1981 and was posted to Brixton in South London. And it was just at the time of all the troubles, the riots in Brixton. So that was a real eye-opener for me, especially coming from a cosseted sort of small village. I'd thrown into the middle of that. I just didn't know whether I was coming or going. But I stuck it for 3 years. During those 3 years, I think my shift were called to something like 12 murders. We were getting something like, on average, about 20 murders a year there. But whilst I was still a young probationer PC, the most of my involvement was basically just taping off the scene and standing there trying to look pretty, and that's a feat. And just logging names and things, you know, when people come into the scene. So I had a good understanding of how to manage a scene, or rather the outside of a scene, but I was never allowed to go inside. So after 3 years there, I decided to transfer home to South Wales. My heart was calling me home. And I worked in Swansea, a couple of places in Swansea for several years. Joined the traffic department, or as my writing colleague says, the shiny arse brigade. And I did that for several years as well. Became a firearms officer, a special escort group, a VIP protection driver, which meant that if members of the royal family came to South Wales, I'd be part of the team driving them around, trying to keep them protected, you know. If only they knew who they are, didn't they, team? I don't think they'd have bothered coming down. But yeah, so that was great. That was good fun. And then in 1994, sorry, I should know this, July the 7th, 1994, I was on a night shift, and I was a passenger in a patrol vehicle, and we had a call to a stolen car. So we went after this thing. It ended up driving the wrong way up and down the M4, and finally hit us head on. I fractured my spine, damaged discs in my neck. So I was eventually, after 12 months of trying to get back into full fitness again, the force decided that the best thing they could do was to pension me off. And that's when I went back to university. I did my degree. I did a teaching qualification. I did a master's degree in fine art. And I've been teaching for 20 years now, I suppose. So that's it in a nutshell, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And wow, that's quite a story. And so what led you to writing?
Oh, well, that's a completely different kettle of fish. 10 years ago, I was approaching my 50th birthday, and I said to Caroline, my wife, if I'm ever going to write that story that I talked about for many years, then I want to do it before my 50th birthday. And I had this idea of an adventure novel along the lines of a Clive Cussler story, which was based in Egypt and eventually comes back to the Swansea Valley. Now, you might think that's a strange place to locate something like a Clive Cussler story, but in the Swansea Valley, just a couple of miles further up from where I live, is a castle. And this castle was the home of the opera diva Adelina Patti. Now, Patti was probably the wealthiest person of her age, certainly for as a performer. She was earning back in 1880s $5,000 a gig. Now, wow. You think of that by today's comparison, she was insanely wealthy. And she had this castle in the Swansea Valley that she built a theatre, all sorts of extensions and things on it. And she was a devout Catholic, very, very generous. And there was a rumor that beneath the castle was the entrance to a cave system. Now, I knew there was a cave system there because I used to work as a tour guide in the Danarogov Caves, which is just across the road from it. So it just sort of fell in for me. And I wrote a book called The Eden Relics. And that did extremely well, actually. I think I sold something like 3,500 copies in the first month. I had an approach by one of the big 5 publishers. But unfortunately, that fell through at the last hurdle because they felt it was a conflict with one of the authors they already had in the stable. So that came to nothing. But it did inspire me to carry on writing. So I wrote some crime books, and then in 2017, I sent a post out to a police Facebook page, just saying if anybody thought of writing their memoirs, just to drop me a line and I'd see if I could give them a hand with them. And I had a reply from Arthur Cole. And Arthur Cole was a retired detective sergeant from Special Branch in South Wales. And he said, I've got this story about police corruption that I want to write. So I told him, well, just write as many words as you can and send it off to me and I'll take a look at it. And I wrote the book in probably 2 weeks, sent it to me. I then added the color, the flavor, edited bits and pieces of it. And about a month later, I took it back to him. We met up in a cafe in Porthcawl and said, there we are, Arthur. It's the first time I'd met him, although we served in the same force. I said, there you are, Arthur, there's the book, Unethical Conduct, self-published. And he said, well, he was quite surprised to see it so quick. He said, well, that's fantastic. It's just going to sit on my coffee table. And if any visitors come, I can show it to them and brag about it. And I said, well, let's just try it. Let's self-publish it, go for it and see what happens. So 6 books later, in the series, the Terry Maguire crime series based in South Wales, we had an approach from a publisher who said they'd like to take the whole series and republish it with new covers. So we effectively had a 9-book deal. And that's what we've been doing over the last few years. Apart from, I've been writing other things, ghostwriting as well in the meantime. But generally speaking, that's been the main focus over the last few years.
Wow.
Yes, so been busy.
Yeah. And did you always want to write?
Yes, I did. I know you probably heard loads and loads of writers saying that they wanted to do it since they were kids, but I had always written. In fact, I used to write some silly, funny stories while I was in the police. Some of them made the police magazine, so I've always had an interest in it. But it wasn't until I suppose I took the master's degree and all that was involved in that I became to realize that perhaps I could do it. So that sort of triggered the catalyst, I suppose, for the first book. And as others would probably tell you, once you've got the one done and dusted and published, then it's the big inspiration just to carry on then. And we've got, I think it's book 9, which is called Raven, coming out sometime later this year in the Terry Maguire series. We've also got 3 books in the pipeline for a new crime series in South Wales as well. So that'll be coming out soon. And of course, I write under the name of Russ Geraghty as well. And if you're going to ask me why, I will tell you, because there is a bit of a story involved here. With a name like Nigel Williams in Wales, you'll find that there are literally hundreds of us. But there's also one extremely famous writer, Nigel Williams from Cheshire, who wrote The Wimbledon Poisoner. And I knew of this Nigel Williams because I'd seen the serialization of The Wimbledon Poisoner on TV back in the 80s, I think. But I thought, well, we'll see how it goes. There was no chance of me ever sort of making the same name for myself as he had made. So I thought I'd just play it by ear. But it resulted in an invite to do a talk in Coventry Library. This was 3 years ago. And I had this message from the library saying, would you like to come and talk about your books? So I was quite excited. I thought, I told my wife, I've had an invite up to Coventry to talk about my books. Can you believe that? So she said, are you sure? I said, well, yeah. So off I trot. I drive up to Coventry, and it had been well advertised weeks in advance. So I got to Coventry Library and I met the head librarian, lovely lady. Coventry Library, if you've never been there, it's massive, it's huge. It's over several floors, really impressive place. So she took me into this back room and she said, we've set a table up with your books ready for you to talk about them. And I had this horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach. And I walked into this back room and there were half a dozen books, all by Nigel Williams, but not me. And I thought, what do I do now? They've obviously thought they booked the other Nigel Williams, and I'd travelled up from South Wales. So I thought, do I just confess? Do I put my hands up and say, oh, you've got the wrong guy? Or just hold on and see how it plays? So I decided, being the coward that I am, I decided to let it play. And it was due to start at something like 2:30 in the afternoon, and I took my seat behind this desk, pushed the Nigel Williams books to one side very slyly, and thankfully, or rather disappointingly at the time, nobody turned up. So I'd spent 2 hours there waiting, and nobody came to hear me speak. So I rang Arthur, and Arthur was laughing. This was a Saturday afternoon. Arthur was laughing on the other end of the phone. I rang my wife, and I was driving home, hands-free, obviously, speaking to my wife. And And then I began to laugh because it just dawned on me they hadn't come to see the other Nigel Williams, not me. So I didn't feel quite so bad about it. But that's why I added a C then in my name. So it's Nigel C. Williams. And I don't have a middle name. When I grew up in the 1960s, my parents were poor. They couldn't afford a middle name for me. So I took my wife's name. So the C in my name actually stands for Caroline. So it's Nigel Caroline Williams. Yeah, so that's why I changed my name at that point. And the Ruscarity then is just because of the genre change, because it's a horror. I just wanted to keep it separate from the crime.
Okay, wow. Does the other Nigel Williams ever know that he was booked, and that did you ever feel the temptation to contact him and say, this happened?
No, I don't think so. I don't think he was contacted, or I'm sure he'd have been there, but the posters were all up around the library as well. It was really embarrassing, you know. But I'm glad he didn't turn up, and there's no way on earth I'm going to tell him.
Did you come clean before you left?
Sorry?
Did you come clean before you left?
No,
in the library?
No. No. But they'll probably know now.
Well, that's brilliant. Yeah. Yeah, that's far, isn't it, as well? Coventry is quite far from South Wales. Ooh.
Yeah, it is. It's a good drive.
So I guess your background drew you to crime fiction, writing crime, because
yeah, I'm really lucky. My experience of the police service is quite far removed from the dirty, gritty crime sort of scene. I wasn't really involved in any of that. So I'm lucky that I've got Arthur that I co-write with, because he's pretty much done it all. Murders, rapes, kidnappings, terrorism, anything and everything. He's dealt with it all. So Arthur comes up with the main thread for the plots. And in the team is to put set the scene, add the color, the smells, the tastes, all the sort of stuff that makes a book more readable. So it works really well. We've always worked separately. We send each other the Word files, and we'll read the chapter, we'll do our bits, send them back. We've never once had a disagreement. There's no way I'm going to disagree with him, because he knows more about that sort of stuff than I do. And because I have a bit more experience in the writing side of it, he doesn't argue with my take on the other side of it either. So it works really well, and it's been a good partnership so far. We're hoping it'll continue for a good few more years to come as well. Although Arthur is getting on a bit now. But he's actually got more life than me. He's just become a grandfather, two grandchildren in the same lockdown year. Wow. So he's a bit frustrated at the moment that he can't get to see them. But it's great. There's nothing he doesn't know about crime, and that's fantastic for me, because he'll just pile on the plots, and I can then work things through them. It's almost like a fancy contributing editor, really, I suppose. That's what I do for the Terry Maguire series.
Were you a big reader as a child, and do you read much now?
Yes, always have been. The first book I ever read, I think, was H.G. Wells' Time Machine. And that was when I was around 7 or 8 years of age. And that book just captivated me. It was amazing. And ever since then, I just can't go to bed without a book. I've always got a book in my hand. I'm not the fastest reader because I tend to read every word. I can't sort of skim through a book. I have to read every word. And part of that, I think, is that if a writer's spent all that time selecting those words in a particular order, the least I can do is to read them in that order. And so I do, but I probably read only something like 15 or 16 books a year, because, as I said, I'm not particularly quick. But the books I want to read, and the books that give me the greatest pleasure.
And what sort of stuff do you read?
I'll read a little bit of anything, really. I do read a lot of crime. I read a lot of adventure. I'm a big Scott Mariani fan. If you've read any of the Ben Hope books, quite like those. Of course, everybody reads Lee Child. I don't think there's anybody on the planet who hasn't read a Lee Child. But anything and everything, really. This Russ Geraghty guy, I read him now and again. I'm probably the only one who does.
Yeah, your book that I won is still sitting on my shelf because my TBR is insane.
There we are. See what I mean?
I have
it's actually doing very well in the States, to my absolute shock. It's not doing particularly well in the UK, but I sell several a day in the States, and I mean, that's better than a poke in the eye with a sharp stick, I think, especially since it's a step back into self-publishing for me rather than going via a publisher. So it's been quite an interesting sidestep, I suppose, diversion from traditional publishing route. And I'm learning an awful lot about the publishing industry by doing that as well. Things that I never have known, especially in relation to marketing, advertising and marketing. And certainly the US market was never on the horizon for me. But now things seem to be picking up there. So I've got my fingers crossed.
Yeah. It's funny, actually, doing this, I have learned a lot about all of it, how the publishing works, how publishers, and then how self-publishing. It's very interesting. I've learned loads in the last year, so yeah,
it's a massive market. You'd think it would be saturated, wouldn't you, with so many books out there, so many writers, but you know, like yourself, you'll read. How many books a year do you read?
When I'm at uni, 100. When I'm not at uni, it'll be double that easily, if not more.
Well, let's take 10% of that. You know, if somebody reads 20 books a year, there's plenty of space for everyone, isn't there?
Yeah. When I spoke to someone else, they said that because the author community is quite supportive, because they want readers to keep reading. So if they're not reading their books, then they want them to be reading something else. They're not in competition. And I thought that was a really nice way of looking at it.
Of course. And why be in competition with anyone? Because once somebody's read your book, if you haven't got another one ready, why not let them read somebody else's? Because as long as you're confident that the book you've written is good enough, then hopefully they'll return and read the others. But the interesting thing about self-publishing is the way now that people write a series of books and launch the first one when they've got the next 2 or 3 already to go, so that by the time the reader finishes the first one, they start moving on to the second one because it's there and available, and that builds this loyalty. It's quite an interesting concept, and it seems to be working. There's plenty of evidence that it does work. And of course, traditional publishers could never really do that because they'd need to start getting money back on their investment from the first book. It's unlikely that they'd want to hold you back until you'd written 3 books, which could take 3 years before they start marketing the first one.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can read a book in a day easily, if not quicker. So if there's more of a series, then yeah, I'm definitely gonna go for that. So yeah, I can see the benefits of that, definitely.
Yeah, it works. My mother could read a book in a day. She used to like the romance books. That was my mother's stuff. You know, she'd always be reading, and she'd read a book a day quite easily. The library bus was always pulling up outside for her to grab another half dozen.
Yeah, I read one in 4 hours last week.
Did you really? Was that a full-length novel as well?
Yeah.
That's good going.
Yeah,
I'm impressed.
It was that good as well. Yeah, just yeah, I started it about 5 in the morning and I finished it 9, I think, just after 9. So yeah, it was.
You must have enjoyed that.
I did. It was The Last Thing to Burn. I don't know, you might have seen it talked about. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Well, that's a great advert, isn't it? No writer could want a better testimonial than somebody staying up overnight reading the book because they can't put it down.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It keeps me out of mischief as well for a little while.
Well, from what you said earlier, you might need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have a writing day planned, and has that changed during the lockdown?
Yes, it's been absolutely decimated because I teach. As I said to you earlier, everything now has become so disjointed. Although the college I work for have been extremely good. They've been very supportive. They've got good sort of strategies in place. But it still means that we now have to deliver sessions that we'd normally do one-to-one or face-to-face. And after 20 years, I'm confident in being able to do those face-to-face. But now I have to find another way to do that. So as I told you earlier, to produce an 8-minute video with all the information in it that I wanted to convey to my students, it took me, I think, 5.5 hours to jot down the main points, to film the bits I wanted to film of my delivery, finding the images, etc., all the bits that go with it to support that material, and then to edit it as well. So 5.5 hours for, I think it was an 8-minute video presentation. It's just mind-blowing. And what it's meant is that I've had very, very little time to do any writing at all. I normally work 4 days a week, and I have 1 day where I can concentrate entirely on the writing. But otherwise, I get up early in the morning. I'm always up something like 5:30. So I'm always poching around doing bits and pieces. Then in the evening sometimes as well. But all that has now gone out to the window. It's all been disrupted. And I'm really now just stealing moments here and there to write. And it's driving me absolutely insane because that's all I want to do. And whilst I enjoy teaching, I love teaching, it doesn't give me now, after 20 years, the same kick as it did when I first started. And that's because things have changed so much. It's not the same as it used to be. The expectations are different. There are so many more things being loaded on all the time by the Welsh Assembly and by the UK government. And you're more than just a teacher now. You're a social worker. You're a parent. You're having to do things that you would expect the family would do. Not in all cases. Obviously, we have some wonderful people as well. But you only need one that creates an issue, and it destroys the learning for the rest of the group as well. And of course, with lockdown, attendance it's impossible to really crack down on that. If they're not turning up, all you can do is send emails or send letters, and it's just messed everything up for everyone. But it's really affected my writing as well, and that's a big disappointment for me. It's driving Arthur insane, I think, as well, because he's not very happy with the lack of production on my side. So we'll see where we go.
Yeah, well, hopefully it will be over soon, and then we can get back to some kind of routine.
Yeah, I hope so. I'd like to see them offer jobs to teachers now, so that we can just get back to normal. You know, I'm 60 years of age now, and I'm not really keen on going back to face teenagers without some sort of protection from the COVID. So it'd be nice to get that job sometime soon, but it doesn't look as if it's on the cards for us yet.
No, I don't think we're down to 60-year-olds yet. We're behind, I think. So yeah.
But it's probably because they think I don't look 60. You know, that's the problem. I think they probably think I'm only 30 or something, and you know, it's understandable, isn't it? You know.
Well, I thought you were 25, so. Well, I wouldn't have said you were 60, so there you go.
You're a smooth talker. I'm glad I came on now.
Good, so me too. So I guess you don't really have to do much research for your books, but what's the most interesting thing you found out when researching?
Right. Some of the places people hide drugs. That was really, really interesting. I won't tell you where, obviously, but Arthur had found drugs in all sorts of places over the years. And there's one little incident within the first book, Unethical Conduct, where the drugs are hidden in a particular place. And if anybody's read it and wants to leave a comment or something to divulge where that is, or drop me a message or something, or an email, and I'll send you a free book if you've actually read it. But yeah, it's really quite ingenious. But some of the places are just mind-blowing. It's so inventive, so creative, you know.
Yeah.
And the more bizarre, the less chance you've got of finding them as well.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because my current unit is drugs and toxicology, and our lecturer is an ex-drugs forensic scientist. So she's told us some stories of where, what was it, tins of soup or beans or something, they'd hidden them in, but obviously not in everyone. So they had to get a team of forensic scientists to open tins. They went through so many tin openers to find which cans had drugs in and which didn't. And once they took apart a big wheel of cheese because they weren't sure, because it was some kind of white crumbly cheese, so they thought it might be drugs, but it wasn't, it was just cheese. So yeah, I can well imagine.
Well, when they get a sniff of it, if the sort of drug squad suspect that you've got drugs on you, look out. Your car isn't safe. They'll strip it apart down to the nuts and bolts. They'll empty the petrol tank. They'll just rip the whole car apart. So it doesn't really pay. No. Well, it does pay. I'm sure it does pay, but not if you get caught.
No. Yeah, it's insane. And the amounts of money involved are just crazy as well. Oh. And they look at that as well, don't they? You know, if you're taking money, then...
Yeah, and what people often forget is that that little bit of what they consider perhaps soft drugs, it's actually fueling an industry that is responsible for the deaths of many people. It's responsible for the breakup of families. It is really not something really to be taken lightly. And although I know I do tend to do that occasionally, it is a very serious business. And unfortunately, the only people who are making money from it really are the ones at the top, and they don't care about you, I, or anyone else.
And did you know that heroin was, a scientist noticed that when they were giving, I think it was morphine or something, to people in hospital, they were becoming addicted to it. So he created this different chemical composition, and it was some heroic substance, so he called it heroin, and found out later on that it's actually just as addictive as the original substance.
Well, I didn't know that. That's where the name comes from. Is that right?
Yep.
Heroin.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I've learned something now.
Yeah, and so have
Thank you
I.
very much.
I'm very glad that I've learned it to be able to share with you. So there we go. So hopefully that comes up in my exam in May. Yeah.
And it makes sense as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Bless them. These good old
good
chemists.
Intentions.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Go back and shoot them. Chemistry.
Yeah. Oh, I love it.
That's just a personal thing. If you were going to be a character in your series, would you get on with your main character?
Yes, I would. Yes, I would. I would, because we try to keep our, well, especially the Terry Maguire series, we've tried to keep it as realistic as possible. You don't get the lead characters in these detective dramas having problems with drink, drugs. If they did, they wouldn't be in the job that they hold. You know, a DI is a responsible position. You need to be at least sober most of the time to be able to gain the respect of the people who work underneath you. You also have to be an intelligent person as well to get to that stage. And yeah, everybody has problems, and I understand why authors write these problems into the books, because it engages you. It makes you realize that they're human. They have the problems just like everybody else, and they have to deal with it. And it's what hooks a lot of people to these characters and makes them empathize with them. But our main character, Terry Maguire, is that guy that Arthur and I knew when we served in the police. The guy that you could turn to, would always be there to help you. Yeah, has got his problems, but they're mainly because he's so committed to the job, to doing it properly, and dealing with people who are working under him, who have their problems. So it's all about being true to ourselves, really, in relation to this. We could have built these additional problems that Terry has to deal with, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted to base it on worked with. And yeah, they're no saints, don't get me wrong, but the things they do for the right reason. They don't always get it right, quite often get it wrong, but they do it with the best intentions at heart.
And if you ever had any thoughts of who you'd like to play your characters if it ever got made into a TV series?
Well, funnily enough, yes. That is probably little known in the rest of the UK, but in Wales there's an actor called Mark Lewis-Jones. He's been in a few dramas. He's been in Game of Thrones and other things that I just can't think of at the moment. But Mark Lewis-Jones, oh yes, if you've seen the Eve Miles drama set in Wales, have you ever seen Keeping Faith? Anyway, Keeping Faith sort of lead in that series is Mark Lewis-Jones, and when Arthur and I both saw him, we thought, that's him, that's Terry. So that, I think he's the only one that fit the bill for us, if it ever came to screen.
And apart from that, what's your biggest dream as an author?
I think I would really like to get to the stage where I could retire from teaching and just cover my bills and my later years in life with a book or two a year that actually pays for those little extras. That would be nice. But just to keep writing, that's all I want to do. I just want to keep writing from now until the day I close my eyes and curl my little toes up for the last time. Which I hope is not soon.
Yeah, well, me too. What's your biggest fear, and would you ever write about it?
Oh, I'm not a lover of spiders. I get my wife to get rid of the spiders in the house. Biggest fear, I think my biggest fear is losing someone close. One of my family, my kids, my wife, my dog even. My dog is blind, diabetic. He's has epileptic seizures. So I spend most nights on the settee sleeping with the dog because he doesn't like to be alone now he's blind. And even the thought of losing Zach the dog would break my heart, you know. But yeah, and we have written about one such loss in the book that's due out later in the year, a book called Raven. So you can see how we handle that if you ever get a chance to read it later on in the year.
Yeah, that's weird. I have a blind diabetic dog as well.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
So you have to give him the insulin twice a day as well?
Yep. And yeah,
Yeah.
he doesn't like to be alone, and he gets us up really early because he freaks out upstairs, I think. And yeah.
Yeah, well, we never got into the habit of letting the dog upstairs. He always stayed downstairs. So since he's become blind, it wouldn't be right to bring him upstairs now because he wouldn't know where he was. He seems to find his way around the garden perfectly well. He finds his way around the house perfectly well. I don't know how he does it, but he does. So the only problem we have really is at night he gets scared, he starts to bark, he's crying. So I think I've spent the last 3 months now sleeping on the settee. But it's a small price to pay, isn't it?
It is, yeah. You do what you've got to do, don't you, when it comes to them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I said, it'd break my heart to lose him. So
yeah. How old is he?
He's 10. And he's a little white ball of fluff. He's a Bichon Frise. I should have said, really, he's a Doberman or he's a German Shepherd, really, shouldn't I? But no, he sits on my shoulder and he's like a parrot.
So cute. Yeah, I've got a little Yorkshire Terrier, so it's not much better.
Yeah, my wife used to have a Yorkie before I met her. So they'd and we've got relatives actually who breed Yorkies and do it the right way. And actually they're both judges with Crufts.
Oh wow!
So they're really good, well-bred dogs, and they're Yorkshire Terriers.
Yeah, he's been wandering around actually. Anyway, off on a tangent.
Yeah, it was a bit.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't meet many people that have got diabetic blind dogs, so I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Soulmate.
Yes, absolutely. Are you friends with lots of other authors?
Well, yes, funnily enough, John Nichol, who I know you've had on the show, Andy, who writes as Liam Hansen, I met John Nichols several years ago when we first started out writing together. We had a table next to each other in a church hall, I think it was in Tenby, trying to flog our books to anyone who would stop long enough to speak to us. And funny enough, that day, Matt Johnson, who writes, he's got a contract with Arenda Books. Matt was there talking about his journey from being a police officer to being an author. And it was only several months later, after meeting Matt that day and speaking to him, because he was in the Mets, that I realized that on the day that I went for interview with the Metropolitan Police in 1981, I got on a tube train. I was on my own. I'd just been accepted, and I thought I'd go to Leicester Square to celebrate. And I was 20 at the time, jumped on the tube train, and there were a bunch of what looked like thugs got on the train in front of me. They'd obviously been having a few beers, and one of them started to speak to me, and it turned out to be they were police officers, off-duty police officers going for a few drinks. So they invited me along, and one of them was Matt Johnson.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, a real spooky coincidence.
Yeah, that is, but quite cool, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. But I've met some really lovely authors, and as you said, they are a very supportive community. Some excellent characters, really funny. They'll do anything they can to help you. John even tried to get me hooked up with his publisher. But no, they're really, really good, and I can't thank them enough.
And do you hear a lot from readers?
Yes, I do. I do have a website now for the horror genre under the name of Russ Garrity. And I've got a newsletter there that I try to update once a month. I haven't been able to do it this month because of all the extra work commitments with the teaching. So I've got to double up on that before the end of this month to make sure that at least whoever subscribes to the website thinks they're getting something of value out of it, you know. So I release a little bit of a new book every month, so they see it build up. They'll see the changes as the book is edited and maybe chapters moved around as well. So I've got a little bit of that to do as well before the end of February.
No pressure then.
No, none at all.
Now to the fun questions. What's your most embarrassing story?
Ooh, most embarrassing story. Yeah, I think one of the most embarrassing ones, not for me as such, but I remember going to a call in a flat in Brixton. I was on the area car as a radio operator, and we pulled up to what was a scene of a burglary, and we climbed the steps to the flat, and the lady who opened the door was wearing a robe which was open and nothing on underneath. And she invited us in, and we said, I think we'll leave this for the CID. They're probably more accustomed to this.
Oh, I don't know why women. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, well. And I was so young and green at the time. Well, I must have been red, actually. Blushing.
Yeah, I would have thought you were. It's funny, actually.
Well, I didn't know whether.
I always say most of the boys that I talk to when I interview them have stories involving nakedness, but usually it's their own. So it's quite funny that yours is still involving nakedness, but not your own.
Yes, the other way around.
If you were to invite 4 famous people to a dinner party, who would you invite?
Sandy Toksvig. I'd love to invite her to dinner. I think are, and I would like to have a chat with Lee Child, because the phenomenal success of that series, from that acorn of an idea of that character with no fixed abode, how that has gone from that one book into something that's just an absolute phenomenon. It's just incredible. And I'd just like to chat to him about the day-to-day things, how he actually feels in the morning when he gets up and lights that first cigarette of the several hundred he smokes a day, and how it's affected his life and his relationships, because it can't be easy. We all like to think that it'd be great to have all this wealth, but it can't be easy, because he can't go anywhere now. He's one of the most well-known authors. Facially, everybody knows him. So that would be a good dinner guest, I think. He'd be extremely interesting. Stephen King would be another one, purely and simply because he's such a funny man. His stories are just hilarious, and if you've ever heard him speaking, he's just so entertaining. I think he'd be great.
Yeah.
And fourth, it's a tough one. I think I would like to speak to Richard Burton if I had a chance, because the stories he could tell would probably curl my teeth.
Yeah. And what superhero power would you choose if you could have one?
I think I would, because I'm a little bit insecure, and yes, I think I would like to know what people think. I'd like to be able to read their minds. And then I could have all my excuses ready before they actually start laying into me.
Yeah, I always worry about that, as long as people couldn't do it back again, because no one needs to go in there.
Well, yes, that's a point. That sort of that neutralizes it then, really, doesn't it?
Yeah. At least we'd all know where we stood, I suppose. I don't know if that's better or not.
Yes. Perhaps not.
If you were stranded on a desert island, what 3 things would you like to have with you?
I would. Can I take a Kindle?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd take a Kindle because of the number of books that you can keep on there. I would also take a homebrew kit.
Nice.
So I could brew my own beer. That would be quite nice. And I would also take some charcoal and paper, so I could do some drawing as well while I was there. Imagine I could do all that drawing on that desert island. I could come back and hold a one-man exhibition, ready-made.
Are you a big sportsman? Do you follow
Yes, I am.
rugby?
I was never particularly good, but I used to play on the wing and centre rugby. I played for the Met divisional and area sides. That's 4 area and L division when I was in London, and local clubs and things. So I've always followed the rugby. I'm not a big football fan. I've never really. I don't like the stop-start stuff, and mind you, there's a lot of stop-start in rugby these days. But I enjoyed the Winter Olympics. I enjoyed the Summer Olympics. Anything really, any sport other than football, and I'll be there watching it.
Awesome. And I think that's all the questions I have for you, unless there's anything else that you haven't told us. That
no, I could tell you a true story that inspired part of the Dead Legacy, the Ruscarity book. So if you're ready for this, it'll only take a couple of minutes, but
Yeah, you carry on.
right. Back in 1983, the summers in London always seemed to be hot. The nights were always warm. I think it has something to do with all the buildings in London. It just traps the heat. So we used to walk on night shifts in just shirt sleeve order, the funny hat, the white shirt, tie, and we'd be allocated a beat for the night. And a pal and I had adjoining beats. So what we decided to do was to meet at about 3 o'clock in the morning on the road that sort of joined the two beats together. And we'd meet up for a chat and spend sort of half an hour or so walking together, just have a little bit of company, somebody to talk to before going back to the station. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we were alongside one of the parks in Brixton. Now, it was either Brockwell Park or Stockwell Park. I can't remember which one now. But there was an old disused church opposite the park. Now, this thing was boarded up. It was fenced off. And as we approached it, everything was dark, still, quiet. We heard a woman singing. And it was a beautiful, strong soprano voice. And I looked at my pal, who shall remain nameless, because of what comes later, and said, can you hear that? And he said, yes, Taff. He said, I thought it was just me. And it was definitely coming from this church. So being the two brave police officers we were in two minds to turn around and run away, but we thought we better go and check it out. Had I been on my own, there's no way I'd have checked it out. But I could hear this singing, and as we got closer, it was getting louder and louder. And there was a temporary fence thing put up around the church to stop people from getting in, to nick things, the lead and all the rest of it. So we pushed through the fence. There was a big board across the front door stopping anyone getting in there. So we went around the side of the church, and there were some broken stained glass windows, the victims of stones from the local kids. And as we got closer and closer to this window, the volume of the voice was rising. So I said to my pal, there's someone in there. There's some idiot in there at 3 o'clock in the morning singing hymns. So I got my torch ready. My pal went the other side of this broken window. And as I stood up and shone my light into the interior of the church, the singing stopped. The light filled the church. There was no one there. And that's a true story. And I'm a policeman. Would I lie to you?
No. Yeah, that's creepy.
Yeah, it was. And
Yeah.
I met up with him again, my colleague. He was an inspector in Europol. He was the Met Police liaison inspector with Europol. So anybody who knows who he was will know who I'm talking about. And he was living in the Hague. So my wife and I and my daughter went to Amsterdam to do my daughter studies art as well. So we were going to do the Van Gogh museum and things, the Rembrandt museum, sorry. And met up with my pal and had a chat about this in private. And he hasn't told anyone about it. It remained between the two of us until now.
And now his secret's out. You have to send in a video when it's finished.
Exactly.
So before we go, would you like to tell everyone where they can find out more about you and your book?
Well, if anybody does want to find out about me, you can visit the Russ Geraghty website. It's russgeraghty.com. You can also visit the terrymaguire.com website. So the two websites sort of link to us. You could also find myself and Arthur on the Wordcatcher Publishing website. And apart from that, you can always find me on YouTube. I'm forever doing one stupid thing or another on there, especially with the art. So if you ever do feel the need to laugh at someone, they're embarrassing situations because they just got a face for radio, etc., and a voice for still photographs, then you can always check it out.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you, Don. I really enjoyed speaking to you.
Me too.